All right. Give about one more minute, make sure we get a few more attendees popping in, and I'll go ahead and get started. All right, I'm going to kick it off. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for spending some time with us today. We're going to start with just some housekeeping tips for today's presentation. First of all, thank you for tuning in today. I hope that the next hour provides at least one aha moment for you, or at a minimum, a confirmation that you're already on the right track. Just a few housekeeping tips before we get started today. All lines will be muted throughout the presentation. If you have a question, please use the chat or Q&A feature down at the bottom of your screen there. And Lauren Walsh and Naima Lee, our two co-hosts today, will be monitoring and answering those throughout the presentation. At the end of each section, we'll pause, and if there's any great questions that maybe we want to broadcast to the entire audience, we'll go ahead and do that. And then any questions that we're not able to get to before the end of all of our time together today, we'll go ahead and send the answers in our follow-up correspondence. Before we dive into the presentation, I just wanted to give you a quick note about myself. My name is Cara Bernard. I'm the Managing Director here at the Lyndon Group. I have about 16 years experience in the travel, meetings, and expense space. Currently based in Oregon, former Southern Californian. I've spent about, out of those 16 years in T&E, I've spent about 9 on the client side, 4 with SAP Concur, and then the last 3 have been here with Lyndon Group. On a personal note, I'm a nature lover who collects vintage sci-fi robots and loves coffee. I drink lots of coffee, so hopefully I'm not talking too fast today. The Lyndon Group is a certified SAP Concur partner and has been consulting or configuring for about 10 years. Our services range from complex global deployments to small configuration projects to even temporary backfilling your interim open positions for your internal teams, leave of absences, that sort of thing. Our team is comprised of CPAs, ex-C-level finance executives, Concur implementation experts, you name it, we have it here on our team. All right, so enough of the busy stuff. Let me go ahead and get started with our presentation today. So the last 5 months are a blur due to the dramatic impact the global pandemic has had on our business travel operations. On the whole, most organizations have already implemented some interim plans, right? So they've made policy changes or process changes. Some of you have even already reconfigured T&E software. You're handling safety travel issues, you name it, right? Over the last, since about mid-March, I have spoken with or presented to an average of about 50 travel and expense professionals every week. And while those professionals work for organizations that span across different industries, different company sizes, countries, culture, and even the individuals themselves had different tenure within their organizations, there was one thing that we all have in common, and that's that nobody is 100% sure what the next normal is. And we need to be prepared for whatever it is. And we need to do it all while still managing our regular jobs, right? So congratulations, everybody. We've made it through the crisis management stage. But after hearing the same questions and concerns and collective sighs and uhs over the last couple of weeks and months, I decided that in the spirit of we're all in this together, that I wanted to give away some of our secret sauce. So what we do when we do assessments, and I wanted to kind of share some of that with all of you today and our clients and prospects, friends, and colleagues, just to kind of help you guys think about things that you could be doing in your programs with your data to help you prepare for that, whatever that is going to be. So today we're going to talk through the key data metrics that we use as a consulting firm during our program assessments, what new reporting requirements are recommended based on everything coming out of the global pandemic, and then finally we'll review a few best practice reporting strategies to help you ensure that the data is effective and properly being communicated to help your organization achieve its goals. We'll start with some benchmarks and indicators. So as I said before, our firm is conducted hundreds of T&E assessments for clients in which we analyze every facet of their program, right? From written policies to their financial posting process and just about everything in between. Most organizations analyze their data by internal business categorization, such as region or business unit, which makes sense when you're measuring spend or compliance, things like that. But to look at your program holistically, we analyze the data by your Concur expense configuration. And I say Concur expense, and I'm going to talk about Concur a lot today, but if you're on the phone today and you don't use Concur, these same practices and benchmarks could be applied to any travel and expense software that you've used. Just think about it from a configuration kind of point of view. So when I say policy configuration, a lot of times people are confused when we say that word because they immediately think I'm talking about written T&E policies, but I'm not. I'm talking about a set of configurations in Concur. Those configurations drive things like unique expense types, your forms and fields, the workflows, and those different policies are typically indicative of a unique set of business requirements that drove those requirements in the first place, right? This might be different policies or countries, and we'll talk about that more in a little minute. So for us, being an analyst coming in and looking at your program for the first time from the outside looking in, which is what I'm asking a lot of you to start thinking about doing today, is to reevaluate your programs, is we use that as kind of a denominator to help us create this baseline of reporting. One of the first things that we look at, again, is those expense reports by policy. So some companies may have this broken down into regions or countries, and others might have it by card program, like, P card versus T&E card. Others do it by user population, might be internal users versus external users. But ideally, each one of those policies kind of stands alone again as its own set of business requirements. A lot of Concur configurations also start with a global configuration. So there might be policies that are configured in your site, but not necessarily in use. So this is kind of where we start to help us look to see what's being utilized and what's the kind of footprint of your overall configuration. It also really helps us when we get done with our assessment, and you'll hear me say this a lot, we're looking for change management impact. So a lot of times somebody will say, well, we need to make this change. Maybe we need to add new expense types for COVID or something. Well, when someone comes to us and says that, the first thing we want to know is how many sets of configuration does that change impact? So this gives us kind of a benchmark to understand that. The next thing we look at is spend by payment type. So there's several indicators that are here when we're reviewing this data. A program with high cash spend indicates potential opportunity for increased credit card rebate dollars, right? That's a pretty much easy one. But also it gives you, credit cards, the advantage there is it gives you some improved controls to reduce spending and or misuse and abuse. The other thing we look at here is if a program has a ton of payment types, if I look at this and there's 56 payment types, there's a potential opportunity there to streamline card programs, maybe your card feeds, and that's not only going to help you, again, consolidate that spend to hopefully increase rebate dollars, but it's also going to improve the end user experience and the amount of data consolidation that you have to do. So if you've got a really old legacy program where maybe your credit card company set it up where each one of your different companies or the way that you set it up resulted in a ton of different card feeds, it's time to see if you can have a conversation with them to streamline that. The next thing we look at is age transactions, and honestly, this is probably my most used tool when reviewing a client's program details. The dashboard that we developed can tell a lot about a company's corporate card program health, and it's one of the second or third thing I look at, and I look at it in detail. We look at the number of unsubmitted transactions by payment type that are aged 30, 60, or 90 days, but we also look at if those transactions belong to an active or inactive user. And ultimately, it helps us better understand how your employees are paying their T&E expenses, but more importantly, to look for some check engine lights. Because this one is one that we use all the time, I wanted to give you kind of a look into it and talk through what some of the red flags that we might find on something like this. So for example, a report with a high volume of aged cash transactions typically indicates needs for employee training. There's a problem here, right? People are spending money, but they're not submitting their expense reports to get their own money back. That's kind of a red flag. This also creates a risk of cash liability, right? Some states do have taxation and wage laws related to aged expense reimbursements. So organizations typically should require that those cash reimbursements are requested from your employees within 30 days to minimize that risk. A report with a high volume of aged corporate card credit transactions is almost always tied to a company billed, company paid program. I'm sure there's some of you on the phone today listening in, shaking your head like, oh, tell me about it. Well, I mean, this tells us that this may not have the proper controls, training for users to ensure that you're getting a timely submission on those actual transactions. And for those who don't know, company billed, company paid is where the organization pays the entire credit card bill versus individual cardholders having statements. The next thing we look at, again, I said, is the active and inactive user status. And you'll see in the sample here, this company, this made-up company, had about 1,800 transactions that were sitting and related to inactive users. And so that tells us that there's probably something wrong with the offboarding process, that that company doesn't have the right controls around offboarding their employees, and it probably needs some review right away. The other thing is not shown on this slide, but behind the scenes, when I see that there's a bunch of money sitting over here in 90 days, especially on a credit card program, we're going to dig in to see how much of that is greater than 120. And if there's a high volume of that, that is, sometimes we look and we see transactions have been sitting in the expense system for years. And that really means it's time to clean that up, especially right now. So many organizations are making ERP changes and credit card provider changes. You know, they're taking advantage of this slow period to kind of revamp their programs. You can't just put a new credit card in until you clean up all the mess of the old stuff. So it's really something that we take a look at, and this quickly can give us a glimpse, which it could for you as well on your own programs, of what the health of your credit card program is. Maybe you're on the phone today and you don't actually manage this. It's handled by a different department. I highly encourage you to run this metric and just kind of look at how your program's doing. The next thing we look at is cash spend analysis. You know, even with mandated corporate card programs, you're going to have some inevitable cash spend, right? The typical ones are mileage, tips, home internet, normal things like that. But if you do have a corporate card program and you look at your top cash spend categories and mobile and mileage aren't in the top 10, and instead you see things like hotel or employee meals, maybe you don't have a completely strict mandated corporate card, you kind of leave it up to employees. Problem here is that when you see spend on hotels and meals and things like that, this is actually creating some risk for you. Not only are you losing rebate dollars, which is ridiculous because hotel is a great amount to spend, but you're potentially creating some risk. When we think about industries that have regulatory issues, things like external attendee spend, right? So think about HCPs for pharma and life sciences, or the aggregate spend for financial advisors in financial services. Those types of organizations, if you have a high cash spend on external meals and entertainment, that's not going to give you the same robust transactional data that you get with a credit card, which really creates a risk when that aggregate spend could be disputed. So I have a history in life sciences and pharma, so I know that if I said I spent $1,000 a year on Dr. Bob Jones, and Dr. Bob Jones said, oh no, you didn't, I had to be able to go dig through that and help my compliance team figure out why there was a dispute. If I just have a bunch of cash transactions and flimsy receipts without that credit card data, it creates a little bit of risk. If an organization has other or miscellaneous as both a parent and a child expense category, and that's also in the top of their spend, this indicates that it needs to be reviewed at the line item detail level to see, do you need additional expense types? Is this truly a thing where your employees just don't have a place to put something, or does it need employee education? And we do this all the time when we analyze other spend, and we'll see a ton of stuff in there. If I run a quick vendor check and it's 50% Chick-fil-A and Applebee's, I know that people are just being lazy and dumping things in the other category. So we see this a lot in organizations of all sizes. And it's no time like the present to start looking at this and trying to get this behavior in control before the volumes of expense reports start to tick back up. The next thing we look at is spend by expense type. You guys are probably already doing this, right? You're already analyzing your spend categories, make perfect sense. But we look at a couple different things here. One thing is I find a lot of clients tend to look at averages. And I highly recommend that you look at averages and medians, because averages could be easily skewed by one or two transactions that were really high dollar, and they're going to kind of skew your thresholds, right? So a median is going to give me that middle range. And so that's a much better analysis by transactional level to compare to my written policy. So if I'm trying to see, hey, we set home internet at say $75 a month, and I run this and I see that my median expense for that is 100, that causes me concern. Do I need to put in some hard kind of stops to, make it a maximum threshold? Or is it below that? Is it an opportunity for me to do a little cost savings where I might be able to reduce those thresholds because the averages really fall more like $50? So those are things to look at. The other thing is, if you're comparing your median to your averages, when you look at them side by side, like the example here on this chart, we like to see if there's a huge jump. So if I see a transaction average is $500 for a hotel's room, but then I see the average is 30,000, that tells me somebody misclassed something. But I want to understand why. Is that truly, one or two people that should have put some expenses maybe under meetings and events? Or is it truly that there was just somebody paid for a block of rooms? I mean, just basically the point here is use the two of them so that you can look and compare to kind of understand better the trends of your own program. The next one is mobile utilization. This, really what we look at this for is, again, to understand how your users and approvers are using whatever mobile functionality comes with your T&E program. But the metrics can also indicate opportunities for improving workflow. So if I see really, really low mobile utilization, but I see a really long workflow time, that tells me that there's an opportunity to educate your employees to leverage the mobile device for approvals to speed that up. Another thing it tells me, again, is change management impact. If somebody comes to me and say, I want to do this really complicated configuration, I want a drop-down list and all this stuff, I'm going to say, yeah, that's good, but I'm going to understand and know that you have maybe a really high mobile adoption, and that user experience is not going to translate well from desktop to mobile. So we might get creative on what it is you're trying to do, keeping in mind the end user experience. Once we have run and analyzed kind of that first core set of data, we start to look for specifics in each individual policy. So the next set is where I'm focused on one set of configurations within your T&E software, in this case, Concur. We start with looking at user metrics, and this tells me a lot of different things too. So we look at unique number of employee IDs that are submitted. So I'm looking within a specific policy, out of the volume of expense reports that were submitted, how many unique employee IDs do I have? I'm going to compare that across all policies also to your full load of active users, because for us, that helps us audit to see, do you have any variances where maybe you have a ton? We did an assessment once for a client that they had maybe 2,500 people submitting expense reports, but they had over 6,000 users. It had turned out that they had divested some companies, and their IT department was in charge of offboarding those. They left them in there. This could create risk for organizations, especially if you're global. California, Illinois, any of these states that have the really kind of trickier countries with GDPR, so privacy laws, right? If the people don't work there anymore, there could be things in their profile that you need to get them out of the system. So that's one thing we look at. The other thing we're looking for is just trends within your users, right? We want to know the average number of reports per employee, the number of users with just one report, and how big of a population is that. We also look at the top 10 employees with the most reports and have conversations to say, does this make sense? Is this somebody that is a department admin and she's reconciling charges on a P card for the whole department, so she's doing an expense report every couple of days just because surely of the volume? Or is this a situation where they just need some education? because at the end of the day, you're paying for each of these expense reports, right? So if an employee training is needed on the volume expense reports, which would help align the volumes, if you have, for example, a company billed, company paid cardigan, it makes sense that you have one expense report a month. If you're on an individual bill, individual pay, a cash only program, even individual bill company pay, the truth is a best practice is twice a month. So if I see that the best practice is around twice a month, but the users, I see one a week, that's costing you more money in the long run, and there's an opportunity to save something there on the transactional volume. It also tells us, again, the change management impact. So how many people within this particular policy are using it? When we want to make a change, what does that look like to deploy it? Which we're in this constant state of change, so it's kind of the theme here is knowing your own program to be ready for it. And of course, it also highlights any opportunities to improve user provisioning controls. The next thing is pretty obvious too. We look at expense report counts. We look at them by month to look for trends and spikes. You're likely already doing this if you're effectively managing your contract volumes with your T&E software provider, but it also can support other planning. So if you run, say, an internal audit team, and there's always a huge influx of reports right after the national sales meeting, and I've been a salesperson at some of those national sales meetings, you should be auditing our expense reports, trust me. And so it's time, maybe you know this and you can see these trends where they always spike. It's actually a good time for you to ramp up your staff to do additional auditing and processing, or maybe even increase the percentages temporarily because you have such a higher volume. So knowing the trends can help you prepare for those busier periods, right? And avoid having any backlogged reimbursements, especially if you're an organization that does do a lot of audits. If you have regional policies, understanding the counts by country is also important because, again, it gives you idea of change management. But if you're like me, where I had to basically cross-charge back to every country, when I was on the client side, I had to cross-charge my Concur expenses and all of my program, my whole department had to be cross-charged back to each local country. I needed those expense report counts to help me understand what percentage of that cost I was properly allocating. The next thing that we look at is the percent of reports ever sent back. So there's a default field in Concur reporting, but you can also do reports like this built off of workflow steps. But we look at this because in general, right, and this is just based on our experience, all the times that we've done audits and what we see over the years. But if we see that about 10% or more of your expense reports are sending back, we want to know why. Basically, understanding this at the policy level allows me to compare. If I see that one organization's at a 25% rejection rate or a send back rate and another one's only at 7 or 8, there's something going on in that particular region or that user base that's causing those reports to be sent back. And they could be being sent back by the approver, the auditor, it doesn't matter. But it just tells me there's something there. And you know what? The issue isn't always just missing receipts or inept submitters. It could be a data validation issue. A lot of times we see companies that have configured Concur to allow their users to cross-charge and allocate, but they haven't really optimized the way that it's set up. And so what happens is it creates a lot of matches in account codes. And so somebody's reviewing that in accounting or in AP, and they're going to kick those back. It tells us that there's an opportunity to fix the configuration by putting in validation tables or things like this that are going to prevent you from having to go back. Because the more that you send them back, the slower that reimbursement cycle time is going to be. And it's not always a 100% accurate measure, but based on our collective observations, anything greater than that 10 to 15%, at least at a minimum, warrants an understanding as to why, so that I understand about my group. Delegate user metrics is another often overlooked metric that people track. And in specifically SAP Concur Expense, it can be you can basically assign another individual. So I can say you're my delegate. You can create, you can submit, you can even approve for me. And some organizations rely heavily on administrative professionals to create and or submit reports on behalf of other employees. Or maybe that company allows delegation during leave of absences if I'm a manager. And there's a lot of different controls that can go into that to make sure that if you're using this functionality, it aligns with whatever approval matrix or signature authorities you already have in place. There are other organizations that strictly prohibit this, but they may not have optimized their configuration to make sure that it isn't in use. And so we run this just to kind of get an understanding of what's going on and to see, does the reality of what's happening actually align with your perception? And the other thing to think about here too is there is some functionality in the system that isn't available to delegates. So understanding, we once had a client that said, we cannot turn on, I think it was something like missing receipt affidavits. We can't do it. We can't do it because it will impact our delegates and they are too important. Well, we looked at it and their delegates represented less than 1% of all expense reports created and submitted. So they were penalizing the entire user base because their perception was this functionality is not supported, therefore we can't deploy it. So when we're looking at this, we're understanding not only what's feasible from a configuration perspective, but again, does it align with your other financial controls? Expense type analysis is another area. Again, I'm sure you're already looking at spend, spend by parent, spend by expense, makes sense. But understanding this both from a different, like at the regional configuration level, I'm sure if you're not already doing this, looking to see, do we have a different top 10 set of expense types in different regions? And if so, why, is a good thing to do. The other thing that we really dig into is, again, other. Other, truthfully, is like the lost and found closet in an elementary school in most cases when we look at this stuff. And you never know what you're going to find in there. It could be a sticky old lunchbox. It could be a brand new set of sneakers, right? But when we review it by itself, we're looking for any other red flags. We're looking for other, we're looking for those categories, like I said before, hotel or meals, anything that could create a risk. And then we start to really dig a lot deeper into it by looking into vendor details, transaction dates, and payment types, because it helps us to understand if you need to add additional expense types or if there's just a complete, disregard for your controls and policies, things like that. The other thing that's interesting that a lot of people don't look at, but we do, is the frequency of use. We have uncovered configurations that, I kid you not, for some of you on the phone today, that, especially if you're mobile users, we had a client once that had almost 200 expense types. No parents, just 200 expense types. So imagine on your mobile device, just scrolling just to find parking, right? It's ridiculous. And we review that to look and see if there's any reason to optimize it. So for example, if I'm looking at a year's worth of data and I see that there's an expense type that maybe was used 5 times, and in reality, the volume of spend for that is so de minimis compared to your overall T&E spend, get rid of it. Turn it off. It doesn't matter that you get that $1,200 transaction to whatever, obscure expense type it is. Stick that one another and streamline your configuration. Not only is it going to make it easier for your end users, but again, it makes it easier on you with all this different data and the volume of expense types. So it's going to make it a little bit easier on your own reporting processes. When we talk, so that's kind of the gist of what we do when we're doing assessments. And that's just, again, we of course do a lot more than that. We look at policy and other things, but I really wanted to share those metrics because I think that if you're not already doing that, and best practice programs already are doing something along those lines, but if you're not, I was hoping that that would give somebody an aha moment of, I don't know where to go. I know that there's going to be a lot of changes coming, and I'm not even really sure what's going on in my configuration. Maybe you inherited it. Maybe you just started your job 6 months ago and you walked in and Concur was already configured and you have no idea what's going on in there. So these are things to help you kind of understand where you are so you can create those baselines that are going to help you prepare for whatever comes next. When we talk about the pandemic and COVID and everything else that's been going on, right now there's kind of, we're bucketing into 4 different categories of kind of new data considerations. And I don't know if they're new data as much as it is a new way to think about your data. And these are all as a result of the pandemic. So the first thing is FP&A. This is not normal. This year is not normal. That's what my 11-year-old always says. It's not normal. This is not normal. It's a daily state. He often explains it. And he's right. It's not. This year, our spend, our categories, all the things that we've been doing we can't even compare it to any other period in our lives, let alone in our programs. So budget planning at the end of this year, or if you're already in them, some companies are already starting them next year, it's going to be a challenge. If you're not really prepared to understand your pre and post COVID trends. So you're going to need to disseminate information to people to really help them start to think about it. You know, how do you segregate what was specific to maybe the work from home period, assuming that your organization's even gone back to the office. But you know, just kind of, it's a new lens to think about how do we prepare our data for the people that are in FP&A and are trying to do their jobs. The next is reporting to your stakeholders. And we'll talk about the importance of communication reporting to cross-functional stakeholders in just a few minutes. But I'm confident that if you're in charge of any facet of your T&E program, that you've been asked for the last couple of months to get all kinds of reporting to help other people navigate through it. It could have been, you know, location reports for your travelers, unused tickets. It might be, what did we spend on internet? We need to give a stipend for everybody working from home, but we don't even know how much to give them. Give us some baselines. So those are the types of things that being proactive and really thinking about what it is I can be reporting to my stakeholders is important. The next thing is both the potential, and this is, you know, kind of an interesting area. I am not a tax consultant. I just want to make that disclaimer right now, but there could be some potential tax liabilities. When we think about, you know, somebody maybe got a stand-up desk or a new monitor, or if they were in marketing and they needed a really fancy webcam and green screen. You can clearly see I did not do that. I do have a really nice chair though. But those things, unless those people are going to put that in their trunk and bring it back to your brick and mortar, that could, depending on where you are, fall into a taxable benefit to your employees. There are countries where if you pay 100% of the cell phone reimbursement, it's considered a taxable benefit. So you really want to be thinking about the reimbursements that you're giving that might put you into a potential tax liability on the employee's behalf. So we're talking about employee benefit in kind, fringe benefits, those types of taxation. So I highly encourage you to be having conversations with your payroll tax department, your regular tax department, to see if there's anything there that you need to be thinking about preparing the data for them. The flip side of that is the deductibility. Now, the one thing we don't know, and this is nothing I'm saying today is 100% sure, it's all based on reading and predictions and things that are coming. As we all, if you're following it closely, legislature cannot make up their mind about the next, you know, economic stimulus package that will go out to the American people. However, we are very close to the end of the year. We're very close to tax season. And there's a lot of predictions that say there's a good chance that the next economic stimulus or recovery programs are going to come in the way of tax deductions for businesses. So if that's the case, are you going to be ready to support your tax teams with that information? Are you thinking about how to prepare that information, how to track it now so that it's ready then? Because I sure would hate for somebody to come rolling in my office in February and say, I need to know exactly how much we reimburse for work from home, and I didn't do anything to classify that data now to make it easy for me to do the reporting on it. So just something to think about. The last piece is obviously business continuity. So, you know, obviously the theme of today is to leverage your data to help you navigate the challenges, be prepared for changes, and to truly understand your program from a much more high level than the granular focus that you in your role today probably focus on. And we'll talk about that, the different personas and what data matters to them. But, you know, it's really just thinking about not only returning to normal, but how do we prevent things like what just happened? How do we have a contingency plan to be better prepared for these types of black swan situations in the future? Nobody could have predicted this. If you had asked me in February if this is what the year was going to be like, I would not have believed you, but yet here we are. When we start to go into the granular categories, thinking about those 4 categories I just talked about, and we start to think a little bit about specific to expense data, T&E data, travel data. Again, I just want to reiterate, ensure that you're tracking those potential tax liabilities. So for furniture, computer equipment, cell phone usage, preparing for future economic stimulus programs or potential tax deductibility. identifying any cost savings opportunities. We've got lots of clients and lots of businesses that are definitely impacted by this and are now looking for opportunities to cut costs. So a good story for you is years ago, I had a program that when I got there and started reviewing the data, I realized that their spend was really high. And I started to focus on some key categories. And instead of just saying, hey, we spent $5 million a year last year on client entertainment, I wanted to understand how much of that spend was above and beyond our allowed thresholds. So our threshold was something like $125, right, per person. But I looked at, assuming that per attendee amount was 120, how much of that spend was above and beyond that? It was $2 million of that $5 million was basically above and beyond what the company had set as that reimbursement threshold. That was really easy to save $2 million by just keeping people accountable to the policy that already existed. So it's looking at that information from the point of view of not just, hey, let's get rid of something, but are people doing what they're supposed to be doing already? And is there any opportunity for us to save money? I was a hero that year. It was one of the first times in my professional career that people clapped at the end of a meeting. And I remember walking out and saying, do people always clap here at meetings? And they said, no, that was weird. And it was weird, but I had found $2 million. So I guess I was a hero that day. The other thing is benchmarking that historical and current spend, again, for things like internet, telephone, and other work from home considerations, so that it is easier for you to do an analysis to see what was our baseline before and how much is it increased because of everything that's going on. The next thing that we focus on, for you to focus on when you're thinking about your travel data, and I'm sure a lot of you have been living deep in travel data the last couple of months, but starting to think about the world that has changed, analyzing your top city pairs for hotel and car rental locations. You're probably already doing this. In fact, this probably should be the number one bullet and in big bold letters, determining that unused ticket inventory, because we're all sitting on this pile of them. Determining financial impact for cancellations. Again, this goes back to what kinds of deductibility are we going to be getting as businesses? And is that going to just be on expenses that reimbursed? Or could it be on cancellation fees? Could it be on, we couldn't do this, so our business operations, these were all the things we incurred as an organization that wouldn't have happened without this. So just being prepared for those opportunities for deductibility should they exist. Understanding who your top travelers are. One of the things I've heard a lot over the last 4 weeks in all these different roundtables and user groups and presentations that I've done is, we are not ready to go back to travel. And when we do, it will be business critical only. And everybody I've asked so far, what do you define as business critical? They were like, well, business critical. It's business critical. It's critical business. Nobody really had a defined answer. And I think some organizations are going through that and trying to decide what to define that as. But I think one of the things that you can help people make those decisions and help your stakeholders understand that is, if I talk to a really savvy travel manager and I say right now, who's your top traveler? They know just because they're always in their ear because they're helping them. But if you look at it holistically from your program, you might assume that sales is the number one team that's traveling all the time. But what if it isn't? What if it is your, depending on your industry and organization, what if it really is sales is high, but you've got this, BD team or a team that was in the middle of an M&A activity that was constantly traveling back and forth? That becomes business critical. Do you leave it to the individual managers and departments to make those decisions, especially if they're potentially putting their employees in some kind of health and safety risk? Or do you create a guideline that says, here's the criteria that defines it? And again, to help do that, understanding your former trends is really going to help you have those conversations of, well, this is what it was like when everything was normal. These was the top travel departments. These were the people that traveled the most. These were the individuals. Let's have conversations with them directly. Do they even want to travel? The next thing is really planning for developing those traveler tracking reports. I can't tell you all the horror stories I heard, especially in the first 30 days, where people were like, I got reports and they weren't right. I was chasing down employees to find them, to make sure they were safe and get them home, and they were sitting in their kitchen eating a PB&J with their kids. And it just didn't update the report because those canceled tickets hadn't done anything. So really starting to think how to leverage your data to make sure that whether it's a homegrown solution, you're depending on your booking tools or your TMCs or other partners, that you really, really, really do have solid tracking data. The last is tracking vendor spend and monitoring those trends to increase travel costs. Meeting data. So tracking losses related to cancel meetings is more than just cancellation fees, right? We're thinking about the travel and the event space. What about any marketing costs that were associated with a specific event? We know, right? We had tons of events planned in Orlando this year and had to cancel many of them. What is the potential exposure to future canceled events? Should this continue on into the future quarters this year? Or some organizations have already said in 2021, there will be no large events. The next thing is tying that travel data related to meeting events. Maybe you were already doing this, maybe you weren't, depending on if you have a strategic meetings management program. It's always such a mouthful. But if those things aren't in place, this is a time for you to really start looking at that data and be prepared for it. And the other thing is, meetings is kind of one of the last categories of the wild, wild west within our realm of controllable spend. And that is because it is so precious to marketing and executive admins in the company. There's a lot of people in the company that don't want to give it up. So they may not have a strategic meetings management program because of that. But the bottom line is a lot of times the events that they're planning are for such low dollars that they're not going to trigger to be any kind of regular contracting process. So you've got someone like me signing it and I can put on an amazing event, but I may not have really understood the contract clauses. Going forward with the volatility that we have right now, where today we're allowed to leave our houses, tomorrow we're not, you want to make sure that those contracts are good. So if you've been someone who's been championing to try and get control of your meeting spend and your meeting contracts and have been unsuccessful to date, I hate to be this person, but there is no time like the president to say, I told you so, and start presenting this data to make your case of, if we would have had control of this, this wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have lost this. Leverage it to help you get some of the decisions made that you haven't gotten support for in the past. So I hope you found some of these tips helpful. We're going to dig in some of the reporting strategies, but Lauren or Naima, did we have any questions that maybe we want to read? I know you guys have been answering them in the Q&A, but is there anything that we might want to read out loud to the whole group?
No, I think we got everything answered that we needed to.
Awesome. Okay.
Sure.
All right. So again, just in summary of that section, analyzing the baselines of your program is going to help you really understand the mechanics, the trends, the change management impact of all the things that are going on in your T&E programs that are going to help you strategize for the inevitable change that is coming. We've been through a lot, guys. Big giant collective hug to our entire industry, but the bottom line is we've made it through the worst. It's just more change is going to come. So this is really thinking through how to leverage this is going to help you get there. So let's talk a little bit about best practice reporting strategies, but just to make sure I haven't put everybody to sleep, I'm going to kick off a poll, Lauren, if you want to kick that off. I'd like to kind of get an idea of what you're currently using your data for today. And I think this is multiple choice. So if you want to select a couple of them. Do you use it mostly to measure performance, to make decisions, to monitor controls or assess risk, tracking compliance, data validation, or are you someone on the phone that's like, I only came here because I was interested in seeing Cara. Hi, thanks for coming. But I don't really know because I don't do anything with data. So I'll give it just a minute, Lauren. You can let me know when we need to close that.
Okay. Give it a few more seconds.
Perfect.
All right, I'm going to end it right now so we can see the results.
Awesome. Well, it looks like the majority is tracking compliance. That's pretty good. But there is some measuring of performance, making decisions, not a lot of data validation. That's good. That means probably most of you already have good, robust integration practices in place. And then a few of you are not sure. So let's talk a little bit about what your data is going to be used for. You know, when we think about measuring performance. So measuring performance could be, you know, one time I was asked to create a dashboard, and I had to get data out of Concur, then put it into Tableau or Business Objects or something. I don't remember what I used, but one of my sales managers wanted to see a pie chart of sales numbers compared to T&E expenses. And they loved it because it really gave them an idea of, this guy spends the most, but he sells the least. Like, I need to have a conversation with them. That's one example of measuring performance. Another might be you're tracking metrics for your processors, you know, and does processor A process more expense reports in a day than somebody else? So that's what we mean by measuring performance, not just like performance of your software, but your program, your controls, or even individuals in their daily jobs. The next is making decisions. And this is my favorite. I can't make decisions. First of all, I'm a data nerd. I love data. I like to look at it every 7 different ways and different, you know, I love data. So, but I also like data to help me make decisions. I rarely want to make an emotional based decision, especially in hard times like this. And I know a lot of organizations are spending a lot of time looking at different scenarios and cost sheets and all these types of things to really get an idea of how to help their business, save their business, sustain their business, whatever the case may be. It's no different for you. And as a really good program manager, especially best practice program managers, you guys, you know, you are the champions of your program. And so if you could use your data, and I know I won't swear on none of these because I'm sure I'm being recorded, but if I can say BS in a bar chart, I'm going to, right? If I can give you something that says what your perception, it does not align with what is actually happening, I take all emotion and all debate and out of that conversation, especially when we're talking about things like changing policies, which can become very emotional, or, you know, other process changes. If I could leverage my data to really have a meaningful conversation and a benchmark, it's there. And you think that would be common sense, but a lot of people don't use it. We touch hundreds of clients, and I can tell you a lot of people just don't. The next is monitoring controls or assessing risk. This was the #1 answer. So this is things like, are we looking for non-compliant spend? Are we tracking attendee details, depending on our industry, for HCPs or financial advisors? Do you have detailed location reports? So all of this is around, you know, if I'm a travel manager, I want location reports and I want to know who keeps booking first class tickets. If I'm a finance manager, I'm going to be looking at it from a different point of view. So that is monitoring controls and assessing risk. The next piece is tracking compliance. So this is, you know, you've got audit rules probably in your system, but do you ever run reports to see how often those audit rules are actually flagged, to see if it's an opportunity for some employee education, especially those kind of soft warning audit rules? I call those the airplanes in the sky. I know they're probably pitching me a Corona, or if I'm back in SoCal, a volleyball tournament, but I don't ever look at it. I just know it's there. I can hear it. That's what I think a lot of those audit rule flags are. So I want to know, can I get rid of those because I'm ready to change the language? I'm going to start that by looking to see the frequency that they trigger. The other thing is obviously just monitoring spend, gifts, you know, all the normal key compliance categories that falls into this bucket. The last is, a lot of times, even, you know, I mean, you've ever heard of the saying, the barefooted cobbler, right? Or the gardener with the dead grass. You'd be surprised how many organizations still have manual processes to load their employee information and pull their accounting information out. And if you're doing that and you're not cross-validating what you put in the system or what you pulled out of the system that somebody may have manually manipulated against whatever system that came from or where it's going, it's a missed opportunity. So data validation is really just to make sure that what I've put in Concur aligns with what's in my source system, because I have a manual process. So employee information, manager changes, cost center changes, if that's being done manually, there's a good chance that something got missed. And it's good at a minimum on a quarterly basis to run your data out of Concur and compare it to your source systems. So remember earlier we talked about data for your cross-functional teams? Remember before even that, when I said I used to be on the client side? So if you're one of the ones responsible for your program, I'm guessing that you have felt like this, right? Especially in the past couple of months. Everybody's coming at you at once. I need a piece of information about this. Or maybe you're in one of these cars driving towards the person, right? If you can design a reporting strategy that allows you to communicate your key metrics to those teams, those cross-functional people through dashboards or monthly reports that they can digest, right? Not just massive data dumps. But you can start to manage the flow of those requests and ultimately enable your stakeholders to always have the information they need to make smart decisions. But it also creates a foster of teamwork. I'm surprised at how many organizations do not have some kind of steering committee or team that is formed with cross-functionals. And I'm sure a lot of you had to form these during the crisis management stage of the early, the first month or two of the pandemic. But the idea here is I really want you to be thinking about, what could I do for these departments that constantly need these ad hoc reports? What kind of reporting dashboard or strategy can I design to give them the things that they always come and ask me for anyway, proactively? How do I design this while things are kind of slow so that it just goes to them, right? You want to push that information out versus having them come out at you all at once. And I just got to say, you're all the real MVPs too. I mean, I've been in this industry a long time. I think you probably have one of the most undervalued positions in the company. So everybody reach around, tap yourself on the back, because running a T&E program is hard. And a lot of times people are like, would I just, no, you are a champion. Look at all these different cross-functional teams you support on top of every single employee in the company. So the next is really thinking, and this might be fundamental for some of you, but it's important to think about, when you're delivering data to those cross-functional teams, really make sure you understand their focus area, right? So an HR person is going to be much more focused on employee experience and maybe compliance than cost savings, right? Your IT team is probably a little bit more focused on security and process improvement and some controls, sometimes cost control, but it's just not as important to them. Whereas if you're giving a dashboard to somebody in finance, they're going to want to look at it. If it's procurement, they're really going to want to look at that vendor spend and the opportunity for savings. So really thinking about, when you design this reporting strategy to disseminate this information, to make sure that you are giving it to the right audience. The last one is, determining how and when you need the data. Most people do not have time to sift through lines of data in a report. So dashboards, charts, graphs, give them visuals of the metrics that matter to them. And if you aren't super savvy on how to use Concur's products, use the products you do know. Get a data dump, get it in Excel, get it in Tableau, get whatever tool you know how to use to get it to make it pretty and digestible. And if you think of something, if you're sending IT to do data validation, then you want to schedule or send that report. There's ways out of Concur to schedule things to go directly to an SFTP folder, go directly to email, and I'm not even getting into bursting, but there's all kinds of opportunities with bursting too. The next thing is, think about the time periods. So when you think about, traditionally, we've always reported maybe on fiscal years or quarter over quarter. We've had an uptick of asking for information from December to February and March to May. That's the pre-COVID and post-COVID. So those are 2 quarters. They're not quarters, but they're 2 3-month periods that we can say everything was normal and then it wasn't. So let me see what's happening here. So that's interesting that people started to actually ask us for COVID and pre-COVID and COVID kind of reporting dashboards. And finally, while it may seem like common sense, but once you get the what the data is for, how it needs to be presented, what it's going to be used for, who it is, also think about when you need to deliver it, right? So if you're trying to be proactive and become a true champion and partner to your cross-functional teams, if you know that you're giving them information, let's say it's internal audit, and you know that you're giving them information, find out their audit schedule, know a month in advance when they're going to do it, so that you're already prepared and you've pulled this, and create a calendar for yourself that in your organization, these are the hotspots of when we're going to have to be developing information. And I also want to be courteous to my cross-functional stakeholders and make sure that they have time to digest it before they have to use it. So a best practice program manager is, it's really dependent on you understanding every facet of your program and making sure that others understand it as well. Leveraging these strategies to monitor and communicate your program metrics to the right stakeholders will contribute to more collaboration, alignment across the organization, and allow for decisions to be made quickly. I hope that you enjoyed today's presentation. And like I said, some of it was pretty basic. I hope you took away at least one aha, or maybe just some confirmation that you did it right. We have 5 minutes left, so before I turn it over to you, Lauren, was there in this last section any questions that we need to address as a whole, or were they answered already?
No, we answered everything, but if anybody wants to add anything in the chat or the questions right now, that would be awesome. We can get those answered for you.
Perfect, thank you. All right, Lauren, I'm going to pass it over to you. I know that you have some kind of drawing or post-event survey for today.
Yep. Thank you guys for joining us. We will be sending out a post-event survey, and to show our appreciation for you guys helping us fill those guys out. They're very short. There are a few questions. We are giving away 2 Amazon gift cards.
Awesome, thank you. So they will receive that just through the regular mail, email as a follow-up for attending.
Email,
and
yes.
That will have it. Perfect.
Yep.
All right, well, that's it. If there's no other questions, then anybody else? Last chance? All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I think, Lauren, you'll also send out a link to the recording of this if you wanted to share it with any of your colleagues or people at your company.
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, guys.